So Larry gave me an hour on the agenda, and then he said, talk about 5G. And I said, well, I'll take that 3 days. So I've compressed a lot into here, and I'm going to try and get through it all. Some of these charts are pretty kind of eye-detailed, and I was standing at the back earlier today, and it's a little hard to see from the back. But you're going to post them on the website, you'll get the PDF. But what I'd tell you is, feel free to contact me. My contact details are on the front there, so they'll be on the PDF. And I'm happy to chat about this anytime. It's a big subject, and there's a lot of misconceptions about it. I'm a big Clint Eastwood and Dirty Harry fan, so you know, the good, the bad, the ugly is a pretty easy subtitle for this. And the bigger one actually is the unknown. 5G is somewhat interesting in that it obviously is the next generation of technology, but it's also, we're acting kind of like we know all the answers. And people ask the questions like, well, how much is it going to cost? Well, somewhere between this and this, you know. And there's a lot of things we don't know, and we'll talk about that as well. And those unknowns actually do impact the costs and the performance quite considerably. So we'll talk about all that. So I'm going to give you a quick introduction to IGR. We'll talk about what's driving 5G, right? We'll talk about what is 5G. We'll talk about user-driven requirements, talk about the timeline, talk about the components, and then the issues. And then we'll talk about spectrum possibilities, which is just a great laugh. And potential revenue sources, and go through that. So we've got quite a bit to go through. So some of this I'm going to zip through fairly quickly. The first one being this. We do market research. We have subscription services. We have reports. We do a lot of custom work. A lot of what we're doing today is 5G related. No surprise. The subscription services we actually do 4 of them. And you can see we look at 5G and Internet of Things, small cells, distributed antenna systems, HATnet. So we spend a lot of time looking at networks, network capacity, cost to build networks, etc. And we try and keep it in the realms of reality. So that's where we've really done a lot of work. We also do a lot of end user research. We actually license our own survey software and do a lot of studies with end users, which I'm going to start with. And we've also done quite a bit of stuff on 5G already. Put a few things up there. So I'm going to start with this, and this is actually from survey data from last year. And I said, well, what are the drivers for 5G? And the answer is easy, it's bandwidth, right? It's not just bandwidth, it's latency, but it's bandwidth. And it's not just bandwidth, it's video. Video's a pig. And video is going up like crazy. Who watches Netflix? Right, you're all at fault. Who watches Netflix on their phone? You are definitely at fault. Who has a child who watches Netflix on their phone? There you go, there you go. So by having children, you are at fault. Don't have children, it's a bad idea. My son is a sophomore at Cal Poly in California. That boy, he's 19, I can still call him that. He's 6'3" as well, so our conversations are like this. He can get through 25 gigs in 2 weeks without breathing, right? And what happens, this happened in November, and actually what happened was he was burning through the data because Wi-Fi was quote unquote too slow, Dad. And so he turns his phone into a hotspot and watches 3 basketball games at the same time. Why not? He's got screens. They have 4 TVs in their apartment with 4 boys in it. All of them are internet connected, and yes, they do watch 4 football games at the same time, right? How do they do that? Wi-Fi, LTE, LTE, and LTE. They turn them into hotspots and off they go. But the point with this was, I told him, Jordan, you've got to stop. I need data for when I travel. I'm on a business trip. I'm going to need gigs. I said, you either stop now or you're paying the overage. And he's like, oh, don't worry about it. Yeah, I'll pay the overage. Yeah. So did I sit at DFW airport, actually, no, it was Denver, ignoring their perfectly good Wi-Fi and turn my phone into a hotspot and just cruise the web and download a bunch of video just to run up the bill for him? Yeah. Yeah. So the point being, LTE today is interchangeable with Wi-Fi, right? To us, Wi-Fi was the fast one and 3G was the data one that you had on your BlackBerry and you sent texts with and emails, but it was slow. LTE, of course, is not like that. So we've got a whole generation coming to whom those things are interchangeable. Wi-Fi is often the slow one and is in an apartment complex that they're all students in there. Guess what? They're all on Wi-Fi all day long. Of course it's slow. There's not enough spectrum. So that's the world they grow up in. The chart on the left is Snapchat and no Snapchat. So look at the age groups. Who uses Snapchat in their family here? Okay, oh, a few of you. Okay, we live on Snapchat. My daughter's in the UK, and we just, this morning we were Snapchatting backwards and forwards. But you can see pretty clearly there the age groups there. And then Netflix on the other side. Netflix used to be much more people with young kids, actually, were the big leaders of Netflix. Now it is going more across the board, but you'll notice those over 64, still quite a few of them don't use Netflix, right? So, but again, that's changing quite considerably. The reason I point to those two is that one is images and video, the other one is video, and it's only standard def on Netflix. When they go to high def, we're in big trouble. My son bought himself a 50-inch TV last summer for $300. It's 4K capable. God forbid he puts 4K content over an LTE connection, right? A 2-hour movie at standard def is 2 gigabytes. An HD movie is 4 gigabytes. A 4K movie is 16 gig. We have 30 gig on our monthly plan. 2 4K movies, we're done. So you can see where the problem comes, right? And I was listening to the speaker before the break this morning, and content is king here. It's the quality of the content that kills us. It's great when you have low def stuff and all the blacks and the grays kind of look fudgy and you get all those lines in there. Great, keep doing that. Networks, we can deal with that on the wireless side. But when you start doing HD, things get a little bit more serious. So this is really what drives 5G. Having said that, you'll notice I haven't mentioned 2 things in this little description here. One is vehicles talking to each other and autonomous shit. And I haven't mentioned IoT, right? And we're going to come back to that later on. And yes, I did just swear. But the reality is there's very little money in the IoT side. You can't justify building this network with IoT. And autonomous cars would be very difficult to justify building a 5G network. So we have to build it with something else. And the IoT one, I do get pushback on that. But the carriers who have built successful IoT businesses, when you go to them and say, could you have done that if you didn't have an existing network to piggyback on? The answer is no. If I had to pay for the network, we wouldn't have a business. And you can look at some of the companies around the world who are building networks just for IoT, and they are struggling mightily because they haven't got the coverage, they can't get the investment, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a tough one. This is the mobile data traffic in terabytes per month, between 15 and 20, just for North America. That is 1 million terabytes per month in 2015. Okay, that's not the bad news. The bad news is it doubles into 17, and it doubles again into 19. And the compounded annual growth rate, because you're all a bunch of accounting and finance geeks, is 41%, right? There was a big conference here this week. Verizon has all of its partners here and vendors, and they have a lot of meetings. And I can't go, but I had dinner with a friend of mine last night. He was telling me that they did show a slide that the data is growing at 40% annually, and the capacity is growing at less than that, which is the problem. So anybody who's got kids or looks at their bill, just think about what you did a few years ago. We have 30 gig on our plan, and we regularly exceed it. A few years ago, we had 10, right? And before that, we had 5, et cetera, et cetera. TV advertising, of course, talks about the fact that 2/3 of people use less than 5 gigs a month. Not a problem. It's the other third who are using 400 gigs a month, right? My wife uses like 300 meg a month. The joke in the family is she doesn't know you can do video on your phone yet. All right, so that's where we're going. We've got a big problem here, right? We've got to get more capacity in the air. You don't see a lot of people running around looking for an Ethernet connection today to plug into a wall, right? Kids today don't know what an Ethernet connection is, right? They buy a phone, they buy a tablet, they buy a laptop, and it just miraculously connects to everything they need. So let's talk about what 5G is. There are as many different descriptions and definitions of 5G, and we get more coming every day. It is very trendy to say, ooh, new technology, let's call it 5G. Because then venture capitalists will listen to us, and the press will listen to us, right? And that's really what's happening. The most common is the actual technical definition, which is from the IMT. It's called IMT 2020. And 4G was IMT 2000. So you can see the pattern here. And we'll talk about the actual standards in a second. A lot of the operators, and a lot of you in this room, are talking about trials and deployments in 17 and 18. These are pre-IMT 2020 networks because we don't have a standard yet, right? I'll let you all guess when IMT 2020 will be a standard. There's a clue in there. Some of the trials we've got, and there's some happening in Austin, actually starting pretty soon, they will meet some of the 5G requirements, but not all of them. So you get this muddy 5G branding thing. So really, what we get to is that last point there is we have an internal joke is that by the time we get to IMT 2020 5G, by the time the technology is technically 5G, the marketing guys will be on 7G, right? The other problem is I really wish we'd get away from these G things. Samsung Galaxy 7, the G7, right? Years ago, we did a focus group, a couple of them, and I had Apple and Android users in the room, and I said, this was before LTE was launched, okay? And it was about to be launched, and I said, who's got a 4G phone? And all the Apple guys put their hands up. They're all actually sitting on one side of the room. And I said, really, what have you got? Well, it's an iPhone 4. It's a fourth generation of iPhone, right? Yeah, good. So you see the problem, So we really need to come up with some better name, but we haven't done that as an industry. But really what we're talking about here is more bandwidth, lower latency, and that includes broadband to the home, which we'll talk about as well. User-driven, what do they want? They want better battery life. Any Samsung users here? You'd like a battery, right? Yeah. Things getting warm down there right now? Battery life has been a requirement of every technology known to man since they invented the battery, right? If you drive a Tesla, you want more battery life. If you've got an iPhone, you want more battery life. Everything wants more battery life. And I'll tell you right now, we're not going to solve it with 5G. It does address the IoT need. The IoT need comes from basically, I want to put a radio on a little thing and have the battery last for years. If you have an LTE radio, that's not going to happen. So we'll have a nice low power network on there, right? And that's where that comes from. Data rates and latency, better. We talk about the horrible term, the tactile internet, like you can put your hands around it and touch it and squish it. Basically, we're talking about 100 times increase in speed. So if you're getting 5 megabits per second today, bump that up close to 50 to 100. It will be 100 in the wholesale at midnight, downtown Austin, actually 2 a.m. downtown Austin when nobody's around. You will get fantastic speed, right, as you can on LTE today. And 5 to 10x reduction in latency. Latency today on an LTE network, those of you who tested it, was 60, 70 milliseconds round trip. They're talking about 5 milliseconds, sub 5. Under 10 would be great. We'll be doing really well with under 10. They talk about under 5, which is really quickly. And we'll talk about how they're going to do that. Robust and resilient, it can't fall over. People rely on this stuff. It's got to be a seamless experience. You're not going to be logging into 5G, then logging into LTE. None of this Wi-Fi stuff, right? Passwords, logins. Sorry, the Wi-Fi is available, but you can't get in because you're not special. None of that stuff.
One question for you. 5G, will that be a gigabit symmetrical?
For some people. Yeah.
Could you offer it as a gigabit symmetrical service?
You could. I mean, that's a great question because we don't know what spectrum we're going to use for this yet. So I'm going to say, sure you can. We'll make it a gig up and 100 megs down if you like, because we're still defining it. Yeah. The focus on bandwidth actually is on the downward link, right? My kids, people are uploading more stuff, but they don't do it as much as the download, especially the broadcast. Latency is both ways though, right? So, yeah. Context aware, it's supposed to know what you're doing. You walk into the grocery store and it pops up with your shopping list, that type of awareness. As my nephew says, you go to the gym, he just loads your playlist you want for the gym, right? This is the real application he needs. This is important. So let's talk about latency. This is from the good old FCC. Up the side is milliseconds, and along the bottom is the bandwidth. The blue dots are DSL. You can see DSLs in the 50, 60 range. The blue line is actually the average. The red triangles are cable. So cable's around 30 milliseconds or so. And fiber is around, let's call it 20. And obviously the speed goes up as well. And there's higher speeds than just 50. I've got 200 megs on my cable modem at home, channel bonding and all that stuff, right? So where we're talking about here is that this is where LTE pretty much fits today. You can get 5 to 10, 15, 20 sometimes on a good day with the wind blowing downhill. And the latency, as I said, up in the 60, 70 range. 5G, that's where we're aiming. All right. That's a big change. Now, what you have to realize is the LTE latency, only 5 milliseconds is going to the tower. The rest of it's from the tower down into the radio, into the baseband, back into the packet core, do a little round trip and come all the way back, right? So I've got a really nice latency chart that breaks it all out. The radio is not the problem. The air link is not the problem. The other problem we have is this thing called the speed of light, physics. Anybody who knows physics knows that it just absolutely always gets in the way. And we're really waiting for a Star Trek kind of, development here because we've got to get past that speed of light thing. If my server is in Denver, there is a physical time for the signal over any fiber to get from here to there without all the hops and the processing and all those things. So one of the things we'll talk about with 5G is moving the processing closer to the edge of the network, moving it close to the radio to reduce that latency time. And there's a lot of work going off on that right now by various folks. The first 5G services are high bandwidth services for mobile devices, HD video, fixed wireless video and internet services, HD, and you go, hang on a second, why do I need fixed wireless to my home? I've already got a cable modem, or I've got fiber, right? Or I've got UVerse, or I've got Fios, or whatever I've got, right? Well, the answer is, I've got cable, but I don't have any other choices. And some of those other carriers would like a choice to offer to me. Maybe that my cell phone operator wants to offer wireless services using millimeter wave to my home to provide a competitive service. So it's not just the access you have today, it's also providing a competitive model to it. Digging up streets and putting down fiber is a great idea, and it's a pain in the neck, and it's very expensive, and it's very disruptive, and people don't like it. Would I like fiber to my house? Yes, please. Do I live in a city where 2 companies are building, or were building fiber here? Yes. Have they come anywhere near my house? No. And one of them I will pick on is Google. I've lived in Austin 22 years. Google's here, been here for, is Google here? Good. Google's been here, like 7 or 8 years, Larry? Is that about right? Yeah? I have never met anybody in Austin who's got Google Fiber. Nobody. Does anybody know anybody?
I know one.
One. Okay, one. One in Austin? Okay, is it the same person? I don't know them. I tell you, I mean, it's amazing, and it's funny, wherever you go, you say, oh, I'm from Austin. Oh, wow, you guys got Google Fiber down there. How is it? Is it great? I don't know. If you actually walk down this street that way, 6 blocks, the showroom's down there on 2nd Street. So, but some evolved IoT business case. We want to support all these Internet of Things, connect these things. We want to do it on the backs of the networks and make it cheap because those things aren't going to pay as much money. We'll talk about that. Wide support advertising has got to come in here, and support for network slicing. Network slicing is very interesting. Take the network, slice off a piece of it and dedicate it to a company, an application, or a service. So the best example I can give you is London Underground has a lot of video cameras to monitor buses, tubes, etc., etc. What they want to do is A, connect those cameras wirelessly so they can put them anywhere, but they don't need high-def video or even video all the time. What they want is maybe a picture every 5 seconds of what's happening. When there's an incident, they want to ramp that up to HD video, right? So they could then basically say, this piece of the LTE network will be available, or the 5G network will be available to you on demand when you need it, guaranteed for this price. And when there's an incident, it ramps up, slices off the network, dedicates it to that. My son gets kicked out of the network, no more NBA, because people want to watch what's happening on the tube, right? Tube being the underground, not the tube. Right, okay, good. So things like that get very interesting. You can imagine something like FedEx, UPS having the same side of thing. They could have a video camera in the truck to monitor the truck. If there's an incident, ramp it up to full HD video, those types of things. And lots of services not to be defined. There's pretty good use cases out there, but reality is give you a lot more bandwidth and a lot lower latency, and go be creative, right? And a lot of capabilities that we haven't imagined yet. Use cases, a lot of them we talked about this morning. Connected car, automotive is a big one. Augmented reality, multi-person video calls we can do today. Tactile internet, sensor networks, et cetera, et cetera. Public safety is a big one. You may have heard of FirstNet, right? 2000 and, when was, first year was what, 2002 for that? 2012, right? 2012, let's have a private network for public safety. Good idea. 2013, great. Let's have some auctions. Good idea. 2014, what are we going to auction? Et cetera, et cetera. 2017, we still haven't built a network. We still haven't given any contracts out. And we're still waiting. So I don't hold my breath on that one. Gaming, I know you were talking about this morning, sports and fitness, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the problem. Problem number one. I can do a lot of those things with LTE Advanced, Release 11 and 12. The techies of you in the room know that your networks today are Release 11, 12's going in, 13's pretty much ready next year, okay? And I can do a lot of this stuff. So for example, multi-person video calls. You know, I was standing in Lowe's a few years ago and my daughter FaceTimed me from the UK. I don't need 5G to do that, right? And I don't need, my son doesn't need 5G to do gaming. He's doing pretty well right now, burning through the LTE bandwidth. Do love my son, by the way. Just in case any of you know my wife, thinking like, yeah, Ian's bad-mouthing Jordan again. But he is a great subject. Got a complete aside question. We were talking about this at lunchtime. Both my kids have dual nationality. They have British passports. My daughter wanted hers when she was 16, so she could travel. She got my travel bug. My son, his idea of travel is Google Google Maps. As he famously said, Lauren, why need to travel? Street View. So a couple of Christmases ago, he's asking for a British passport. I was like, why? You don't want to go anywhere. Yeah, I just need a British passport. Yeah. And I got him one. Actually, I printed out all the forms, filled them all out for him, and gave it to him as a Christmas present. He just had to sign it. And I said to him, you're just using this to pick up girls, aren't you? He's like, yeah. And it works. Anyway, problem number 2. The more advanced 5G use cases I can do with more advanced LTE. LTE Advanced is 11 and 12. LTE Advanced Pro is 13 and 14, right? We've got to get better with these names. I mean, guys, LTE Advanced, Long-Term Evolution Advanced, Long-Term Evolution Advanced Pro, Long-Term Evolution Advanced Pro Plus. Long-term employment, that's all it means. What are the networks going to look like? And I know you guys worry about the cost of networks. Firstly, massive MIMO, multiple input, multiple output. Instead of having an antenna that's this wide, this long, and this wide with the elements in it, our antennas are going to look like that, those mirrors. An array of lots of antennas, little antennas. And then the electronics behind it that can shoot a beam at Jason and a beam at Charles and a beam at Andrew, but actually miss Christian. Right? And then Christian decides he wants to check Facebook, and we shoot a beam at him as well. That, and I do mean to you, standing in a room like this, there would be a MIMO antenna. It would be that precise and would track you as you move. Go to China today, into Beijing, and there's a square in Beijing where if you look around carefully at the top, there are big panels, I think they're 128 arrays, and they're about as big as a letter on the top of a building, signage. And they can do exactly what I said. There's going to be a crowd full of people in the square, and they can shoot to individual people. That's what we're talking about. RAN transmission, we need centimeter wave, we need millimeter wave. Basic 28 gig, 39 gig, 60 gig, 70 gig, 6 gig, 18 gig, all the gigs. And you're going to go, well, what have we got right now? Well, we're just finishing auctioning 600 megahertz or 0.6 gig. The highest we have in use today in licensed spectrum in the US is 2.5 gig. That's what Sprint uses. So we're talking, the next band they're talking about is 3.5 gig for indoor. But we'll have some more sub-6 gig. It's talking about 5.8 and things like this. But the point being that as you get to higher bands, you get higher capacity because the signal does not go as far, okay? So 28 gigs, for example, that signal will go about 300 feet. If it's raining, about 200 feet. So you can build lots of really small cells, right? New waveforms, we will have new waveforms, but they will be optimized versions of what we have today. LTE on steroids, okay? You can't get much more efficient than OFDM. It's pretty efficient already. Spared spectrum access. This is where we get into the pipe dream level of things. This is when all the carriers go, I know we've been competing for the last 40 years, and I know we keep suing each other, but really, why don't we just share our biggest asset together? Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, no. That's why we have auctions, and they spend billions, tens of billions. The 3.5 gigahertz band, which is supposed to be used inside, will be shared. That's the plan. And there's supposed to be some magical database that somebody neutral like Google manages. And there'll be a primary user of the spectrum, but when they don't need it, a secondary user will be able to hop in there and just borrow it for a minute. Right? Doesn't it sound great? Just sounds like everybody's just happy, you know. And Google, they're neutral. They wouldn't do anything. Simultaneous transmission and reception. That means I don't talk that way, then listen what comes back. I'm going both. Harder to do than you think. You've got to have double of everything. You've got to have antennas and radios so you can do it all at the same time. Multi-RAT integration and management, that means multiple radio access layers, different technologies. So I could have a 5G transmission at the same time I've got Wi-Fi. And my son's getting this 4K video down. There's not enough capacity in Wi-Fi, so it uses some 5G and glues it all together miraculously on the device. But if you think about that, at the other end, the tower's got to know to talk both as well. Hideously complicated, but yeah, we'll do all that. Device-device communications, we talked about. That's where your device doesn't bother with the tower. I just talked straight to Todd's iPhone. Efficient small data transmission. Just, hey, I'm here. Still here. Yeah, car's still parked downstairs. Still locked. Still locked. Yep, still locked. Still locked. And all of the improvements we've made to LTE with releases 12, 13, and 14, all of that stuff. So that's all we need, not much, right? So let's talk about all the different releases. 13 was finalized in mid-16. And I've got a report, I haven't got it here, on what's in each one. 13 is commercial mid-17, so about 6 months. This one's got the low-power LTE in it for IoT networks. So instead of building a whole separate network like Sigfox or Ingenuity are doing, anybody with an LTE network will be able to put in release 13 and offer IoT as a layer on the same network.
The release, is that the software release or is that hardware?
That's commercial release means that you, Comcast or you, AT&T, would be able to buy equipment from Ericsson and plug it in. Yeah. Actually what you're doing is you're buying a software release, right? So.
Well, that confuses my question. Can you simply buy the hardware and then upgrade to these software?
Yes. If you've got a release, if you're on release 12 hardware, it'll upgrade through all these releases. If you bought 10, well, you should have bought 12.
10 is obsolete.
10's obsolete, yeah.
I like that answer.
Yeah. There are carriers who, surprisingly, are just putting in LTE for the first time. I was actually in North Dakota in December. It's 85 degrees when I left here, and I went up there. It was like minus God knows what. And the wind, I thought it was snowing because the wind was blowing that way. And it was just, they said, no, it's not snowing. I said, well, look. They said, no, it's just the wind blowing the snow off the ground. Then it started snowing later on where the wind was still blowing that way. It was brutal. But no, so a carrier putting in LTE today will be upgradable through all this. There's actually advantages to waiting on that one. If you're Verizon, AT&T, T-Mo, Sprint, you put in release, some of you put in release 8 and 9. Yeah, you're nailing new things on the top of towers. 14, 15 gets around somewhere around 18. 16 is end of 19. And then 17 is somewhere around 2020. That is 5G phase 1. Okay? So somewhere around release 15 and a half, they're going to say, this is 5G. Everything after this, 5G. Okay? All that stuff, 4G. Yes, there are people calling it 4.5G already. And by then we'll be at release, as I said, we'll be at 7G. And then that little bit down there is 5G phase 2. So we're going to continue with our releases up until 2030. We'll be at release 35, right? That's where we're going to go.
Will that be a hardware change, that last phase 2?
If I knew what was in it, yeah, it's too early. The problem with the hardware change question is it depends what frequency you're using, right? That frequency is going to drive the antenna. So antenna vendors love this model, right? Especially when we start layering different spectrum in. The question is on the radio. A radio can normally deal with a band of spectrum. A 6 gig radio cannot go to 28 gig or 16 gig. And a 28 gig cannot go to 70 gig, right? So it really depends on what you're going to do. But the processing to do these things in the radio and the baseband especially, which should be upgradable, yeah.
So you said the antenna vendors are going to like this because you change the antenna each release?
No, it depends on your spectrum. Spectrum use drives antennas.
But yes, carriers are swapping out antennas and others.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we never used to talk about antennas, right? I mean, antennas were boring, little poles that stuck up there, and he's leaving up there for 10 years. Now, they keep having auctions, and they keep swapping spectrum between each other, and, you know, they buy carriers, and you get more spectrum, and AWS3, put up some new antennas. 600 megahertz, put up some new antennas. And on it goes. Yeah. So you get all the 5G features here basically as you go through the subsequent releases. It's like a rolling feature rollout. And no, not all the features will get implemented by everybody, right? But that's the plan, okay? So what does this tell you? What's the big takeaway on this slide? The brisket was good. No. What this tells you is that LTE is actually the basis of 5G. And 5G is actually just a release of LTE, right? There's really no difference. It's just a name. We're in the same family here, right? Right? You know, if I'm release 13 and my son is release 15, my grandkid is release 17, right? We're all related. So there is a natural evolution. There's a natural evolving of the network. And people do get hung up on the we're going millimeter wave, we're going 28 gigs, doing 39 gigs, we're doing this. That's just a frequency, right? It's what's behind it. The technology is basically the same. It evolves. Here's the bandwidth I was talking about. 4G, as I said, down below 6 gig. Millimeter wave all the way up to 100 gig. Don't ask me what we'll get. Who knows? Everything from 6 to 70 is in use today. There is a great story, which I will take a few seconds to tell you. I was talking to the FCC once about getting access to new spectrum. Most of the spectrum in the United States is controlled by the Department of Defense because they need it, right? And so here's what happens. The FCC identifies a band they want to auction. Let's call it 600 megahertz. So they look and they go, oh, the DoD controls. 600 megahertz is a bad example because that's the broadcasters, but let's say 700 megahertz. And they go to the DoD and say, what are you using that 700 megs for? Well, we're using it. Okay. Well, what are you using it for? Yeah, we can't tell you that because you need level 3 security clearance. Oh, okay. So the FCC goes away, finds somebody with level 3 security clearance, comes back and says, so tell him what you're using 700 megahertz for. Tanks. Great. What are you doing with the tanks? Yeah, I can't tell you. That's a level 4 security clearance. And this goes on and on. Don't want to give it up. Don't want to give it up. It's valuable. But that's the band we're going to look. Those are the bands we're looking at. This is my favorite chart. It's my happy chart. If it's green, it's good. Green means we all agree on that frequency band will be used for that technology or in that region for what we're talking about. Okay? Red means no way are we going to use that band for that technology in our region. And yellow means maybe. Right? So if you just look at this, look at the United States, you can pretty much see that 3.8 and 4.4 are out of question. Everybody else we're pretty happy with. Japan, they love the 4.4 to 5 gig band. Right? Korea, they actually don't like it. But China's thinking about it. Right? That is the chart you've got to coordinate as a handset manufacturer, device manufacturer, radio manufacturer, equipment manufacturer, antenna manufacturer to play in the 5G world, right? And as you can see, it's a mess, right? This is today. You can imagine what it's going to be like when we actually start going through the process of approving these things and all the rest. So hideously complicated, hideously complicated. So let's talk about the business side of this. People with children will understand the left-hand side, right? Good? Get it? Good? What we're really talking about here is that the consumers, you and I, are not going to pay any more for bandwidth, okay? We may pay Some of you in the room may say, well, I'll pay a little bit more, but I'll tell you collectively as a consumer group, you're not going to pay any more. ARPU is actually dropping, right? And if you look at what's happening in the US market, everybody's offering unlimited this and unlimited that, and you get more for your money and all the rest of it. So the idea that we're going to put this 5G network in, and suddenly we all are going to start paying not $60 a month, but $90 a month to fund lower latency, when we think latency's got to do something with the gloves the doctor puts on, right? There's no way, right? I mean, not going to happen. So where is the money going to come from to fund 5G? This is the problem. So let's see where we can get the revenue from. Mobile broadband. As I just said, we can get a little bit more. We actually factored in that you could get 10 to 15% more revenue from a consumer for 5G because they're going to use so much more bandwidth, right? The problem is, but by the time you've actually deployed it, because the rate that ARPU is dropping today, that little bump takes you back to where you are today. So zero gain, okay? But good news, 300 million potential customers sitting in the United States. Not a bad market. Home broadband. What we know today is DSL, fiber to the home, cable modem. 110 million homes in the US, 7 million businesses. Would they give up a traditional broadband connection? Cable guys in the room say, no, they won't. Mobile operators in the room say, yes, they will. Right? The answer is there are some people out there who will give up a mobile broadband connection. One company to think about, not to pick on them, but they do make rather a lot of noise about the quality of their network, right? As I tell people, I've done this before, I'm a good-looking guy. I'm a good-looking guy. I'm a really good-looking guy. I'm a good-looking guy. Right? Hello, Mary. Who's a good-looking guy? Not saying it's a tactic used by a certain wireless operator, but boy, it does work well. I'm a good-looking guy. I'm a good-looking guy. Hey, I've got home broadband service. You're one of my customers? I'll give it to you for $50 a month, 1 gig to the home. Interested? How many people would be interested? 20, 30%, 10%? Enough to make a difference. So that question there, I can tell you we've asked the question of the consumer, and the answer is there's enough people who will say, yeah, I'll give it up. I will go to an alternative to get 1 gig speed. Entertainment. The Netflix model, another model, some other model, something. Good content is clearly not just on broadcast TV. Who's watched The Crown? Really? You gotta be kidding me. Where have you guys been? Okay, who's got Netflix? All right, go home and start watching The Crown, right? Isn't it good? It's excellent, it's superb. I'm not saying that as a Brit. I mean, it's good, right? Jeez. That one threw me. Normally when I ask these questions, I kind of know the answer. The point being, Netflix has shown that you can have original content that's very good, and you can build a consumer base and a user base, right? And now we have AT&T with DirecTV, and we maybe have Verizon with Comcast or Charter or both or neither or Dish or whoever, right? But the point being that the mobile operators start to say, hey, everybody's watching video on our devices. Maybe we should be a video content producer, right? Why did they do this? Why did AT&T go after DirecTV? You could talk about cash flow and you can talk about all these wonderful things. The reality is that they could actually control the content and then bypass net neutrality. Now, we have a new administration. You may have heard about it. Net neutrality may be going out the window fairly quickly anyway. So all of these models really become up for grabs in terms of what actually could happen. The end result I see is just a lot more bandwidth, a lot more video, which is really what network guys care about. Advertising, video and entertainment, and, can you sponsor it? Yes. A lot of people have ad blockers. Can you overcome those? Putting in ads into the video stream. It could be like the YouTube model. YouTube makes a lot of money. click on that video, get that 15-second ad before you get your dancing cat. And will consumers be willing to get the ads? Is another question. Will they pay more not to get them? Right? IoT, as I mentioned earlier, there's some revenues here. People talk about billions of devices, hundreds of millions of devices. That's great. So you find out that they're planning on spending $6 a year per device, 50 cents. ARPU for a consumer is $60. So we're talking 1% of the revenue of a teenager, right? Now you see why I don't get it. It's very difficult. If you've got a network sitting there, you can layer IoT on top of it. Fantastic. If you've got to go build a whole network, tough haul. And network slicing, as I mentioned with the tube example, net neutrality could cause some issues on this one, but again, that may not be too much of a problem. So this is our model for 5G revenues from 2021 to 2026. And you go, Ian, that's 10 years away. Like, well, yeah, we had to start somewhere. It's a model, right? We know how many people there are in the country, and we know how many devices they've got, and we know what bandwidth they're using, and we can make some pretty good guesses about how that's going to go. So the blue line is mobile subscriptions, what you and I are paying, okay? Still the lion's share. That's the 60 billion by 2026, by the way. The green is home broadband, which is a mere 16, 17 billion a year by 2026. Advertising is around 5 billion, and people could argue that could be higher. Some people think that should be higher. And entertainment, selling a Netflix type package could be about 5 billion as well. That Netflix entertainment one assumes that the money goes to the carrier offering the content. That doesn't include all the payments to Netflix to watch their stuff, right? So you put all this together here, total revenue is about 210 billion. CapEx to build the network, conservatively, 54 billion, okay? That 54 billion is just for 5G from 21 to 26. That doesn't include the 48 billion from 16 to 21 for LTE. It doesn't include any spectrum. So that's 110 billion in equipment over 10 years, no spectrum, okay? So is 210 enough? Yeah. But what's interesting is if you look just at the blue line, the mobile only, it actually adds up to about 110 billion. So why would you build a network costing 110 billion to get revenue of 110 billion? You wouldn't, right? So we need the red, the green, and the purple. We need it. Got to happen. 2021, about 18% of that revenue mix is going to come from non-mobile, non-subscription sources. So it comes from the entertainment, the advertising, et cetera, et cetera. It does not come from that mobile subscription. By 2026, that's up to 30%, okay? And we were fairly conservative. Could it be higher than that? Yeah. Could half your revenue in 10 years be coming from non-subscriptions? Yes. How much of AT&T Wireless or Verizon or Sprint or T-Mobile's revenue today comes from non-subscription revenue? About 0, right? So big changes. So what this all means, are you confused? Clear as mud, right? Well, you should be. Multiple definitions of 5G, multiple development paths, lots of companies talking about timing. We're going to have 5G this year, you know, etc. Right? The reality is it's IMT 2020, release 16, think of it that way, around 2019 for the standard. First networks we'll see late 2020, the majority be 2021 onwards. Will some other things get crept in there and hammered into the standard by sheer lobbying power before then? Probably. But technically, that's what we're talking about. Very unclear 5G network, the economic justification here. You can't do it on IoT. I don't think consumers are going to pay much more for the bandwidth. And again, that video delivery. So what you see here is more and more being made of what we've got today, higher releases of LTE, and more pressure on them to rename those 5G, right? So if you've got a 5G-like service, well, let's call it 5G. Remember with 3G how that happened, right? Well, our network looks like 3G, right? It happened with 4G as well. We'll have the same thing here. 7G, really, by 2020, on the technical guys. This is not a switch. This is very, very important. LTE was a complete break. We had a whole new air interface called OFDMA, and that was very different from the WCDMA interface used in 3G. So we actually went out and built brand new networks, right? People went out and nailed new stuff on towers. That's not what we're talking about here. We are not going to be ripping and replacing here. Yes, network equipment will evolve and it will age, right? But this is an upgrade. This is going from, literally, we'll go release from 14 to 15. 14 was 4G and 15 is now classed as 5G, that type of thing. And that's a very important point, but it's going to really bring in the confusion level. We actually, what we do internally is we don't really refer to 4G and 5G. We talk about releases. So, oh, what's in release 13? Or, oh, someone's EICIC, that's a release 12 function. Okay, good. You know, when do I get this? You don't get it to release 16. Okay, thank you. And that way, you know, you can kind of stay sane. Connection model, made a lot of models. We've looked at the connections and bandwidth. Evolution we talked about. One thing that's very important here, if we're evolving these networks, then doesn't it matter what we start from? So the investments you make in 16, 17, 18, and 19 are going to govern, I'll get it, oh. They're going to govern what your network looks like in 2020, right? So some carriers in the United States have been known to cut their CapEx significantly and will give you 50% off their pricing if you go to them, right? Not picking on anybody. But they're not investing much in the network compared to what the other guys are doing. You can look at their published numbers. They're very open about it, right? I think that's a massive, fundamental mistake. I think that's going to be huge, because that means at some point they must play catch-up. Otherwise, 2020 looks very ugly for them. They just don't have the basic infrastructure in place. They don't have the fiber, the tower sites, the antennas, the radio. There's nothing to upgrade, right? So what you spend on today matters. It does evolve into that future network, and it's very important. Advertising, entertainment, new areas for the mobile operators, same thing. I know Verizon laid off 150 people or so out to their Go90 product the other day, the video thing. You know what? Go90 is version 1, right? You don't want to get it right first time. But you've got to play those games today. You've got to try those experiments, because in, 4 years, I'm telling you that 20% of your revenue has got to come from places other than you and I. You don't suddenly get to 2020 and say, well, let's get some new revenue here. Can you just get me $20 billion by next year, please? Not going to happen. So you've got to do those things today, like buying DirecTV, getting Time Warner, doing something with a cable guy, a dish guy. Buying Netflix probably wouldn't be a bad idea. Buy Netflix, free Netflix on your mobile phone. Don't know. Just saying. And new business models yet to appear. I love this bit. Snapchat was launched in 2012, the middle of. That was 4.5 years ago, right? 4.5 years ago, 4.5 years from today, could there be something like Snapchat that we haven't even thought of that uses a 5G network? Sure. Could it give significant revenue? Sure. Do we know what it is? No. Right? Instagram, launched in 2010, same thing. So what is it that 5G is going to be driven from? We just don't know. What you've got to do is put the tools in place and the capabilities there and let somebody play with it, right? Look at that. Woohoo. Questions?
Backhaul requirements for 5G.
More.
Can you talk about, that's awesome answer.
Anytime.
Can you talk about the microwave versus PMP versus fiber and what that's going to look like in terms of our infrastructure and building costs?
Yeah, okay. So, all right. More. It's not just more fiber to the tower, it's more fiber in more places. So if I want to put a small cell in downtown Austin, I really want fiber to that cell, okay? I can get by with a multi-point microwave backhaul until the truck parks in the way, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, I'm limited on capacity by the air interface. Fiber is very upgradable for that reason. So you do find that some carriers say it's fiber only. If you can't put the fiber in, I'm not going to do it. Others are saying, let's put the point to multi-point in to start us off, and we will migrate to fiber when it's available. So if I know that they're going to dig up, 4th Street down here in 2 years' time, but I need small cells now, well, put in small cell with a microwave backhaul and make sure when they dig that road up, I put the fiber in, right? And hope in the meantime that the capacity doesn't go through the roof and I need fiber before that. The home distribution models using 28 gig, Windstream does this with Cambridge Broadband Networks. They actually have a tower pole with fiber to it, and it's 28 gig air interface down to the end user, 1 gig service. So that's, so I don't have to run fiber all the way to the home.
Okay. Completely satisfied with that answer. Can I ask one other unrelated question?
Well,
why no revenues? Why no revenue assumptions for autonomous driving? Is there no potential for subscription to the device as a car? You probably don't agree with the premise of the question, given our conversation.
I'm sorry, this only goes to 2026.
Yeah. Okay, that's okay. Got it.
I am cynical and jaded. Okay. Things in wireless always take longer than we expect. Location-based services was the classic. We run around, we have conferences of location-based services, yip, and nothing happens. And then suddenly, 8 years later, out comes an iPhone or an Android phone with GPS in it, and Google Maps is on your phone. Everybody goes, I was trying to do that 8 years ago, right? And I spent billions trying to do it, right? I think autonomous driving is in that category. I think it's going to be insanely difficult to do properly. I think it's very easy to do badly, right? I have a car with the radar cruise. I hate cruise control, but I have the radar cruise on it, and it's actually pretty good. The new one will actually steer a little bit for you, right? But, am I going to take a nap? No way. Am I going to put my kids in there and send the car to school? No way. There's a lot of idiots on the road, and there always will be. It's an amazing fact that 50% of the population is dumber than the average. Just saying. Now let's look at this seriously and say, what about connected car, right? A connected car revenue for us is in that blue line there. Because you buy an Audi, they give you 3 years of LTE service or whatever, and I think it's AT&T has the contract with Audi. Well, you just paid for it. It's buried in your little $50,000 Audi. You still paid for it, right? Autonomous driving is like, driving along. Ding! I'm sorry, your credit card was rejected. Your car is no longer driving autonomously. Shit! Could be really fun, couldn't it?
Thank you.
Yeah. Please enter your security code.
When you talk about 5G being an evolution of LTE, this evaluation conference, and a lot of people here argue about the value of this stuff. They also argue about how long it's going to last.
Yeah.
Right? So one might take from what you said that some of this stuff's going to last quite a long time, except for antenna, which you talked about, as spectrum changes and we move it around and everything would be changing out antenna. Would you talk about the rest of it? And also, there's this big move to software-defined networks on top of that, which maybe displaces a lot of that equipment.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that?
So, we could have a whole hour just talking about network topologies, right? The antenna is completely spectrum dependent, and they being carriers will replace antennas that are perfectly good because there's another frequency coming in that they want to use. And if you put up a new antenna that does both, they save money on the tower. The tower leasing costs are based on how much space and weight you take. So if I have a new antenna that's more efficient, got more bands than two antennas, they'll do it. So you could have that antenna there, perfectly good antennas, 18 months old, trashed, right? The carriers try not to do that. So AWS-3, for example, actually the AWS band in general, they knew it was coming and they knew what they could do and what they had. So they could plan, and they actually put up antennas before they were needed because they had to upgrade anyway for some other reason, put up a new antenna that's going to take care of me for the next 3 or 4 years, right? Radios have to feed that antenna. Radios are much more flexible than they used to be. They're still not infallible, right? You don't have a radio that goes from 2 to 60 gig, okay? But you can have one radio, you can have two radios feeding one antenna array, so you can piggyback on top, right? The question of whether you're going to do that depends on which frequencies, what the situation is. Can you house that radio there? And I'm making the point, I'm pointing like radio and antenna. Many times the radio is up next to the antenna these days, 18 inches apart. So it really depends on the situation. The baseband unit is now being pooled, so they don't usually increasingly they're not sitting at the bottom of the tower. We're about 3 years away from having them at what we call a hub site. So you have all your basebands sitting in a nice little data center somewhere, and then dark fiber out to the radio and the antenna. Those baseband units are increasingly off-the-shelf hardware now. I shouldn't say that. You're not taking a Dell server and putting a baseband on it yet, but the components of them are much more commodity than they used to be. And also, we're getting to this it's a baseband capability. So instead of having one baseband unit per radio, now you have a pool of baseband, and all the radios feed in and they grab the resources they need, right? That's pretty flexible. That is usually software upgradable down this path. Obviously, at some point, there's going to be something in there that you can't get to, but they're pretty flexible. Then we go back into the packet core, the EPC, and that stuff's increasingly all virtualized. I mean, that's your big servers and routing and all these wonderful things. So that's pretty flexible and increasingly virtualized. The other piece I did not mention, I mentioned earlier about lowering latency and moving to the edge of the network. One of the things we're doing is moving the application servers and the content server out closer to the radio. So that baseband pool would actually have a content server sitting next to it. So if I want Netflix, instead of going device, antenna, radio, baseband, packet core, internet, Netflix, I go device, antenna, radio, baseband, Netflix, right? Drops the latency enormously. Netflix, they can distribute their content, but we talk about autonomous driving, autonomous cars. Latency matters a lot. At 50 milliseconds, at 60 miles an hour, a car moves 3 feet. 3 feet, right? So 2 cars at 3 feet error, that's 6 feet. That's plenty of room for a big bad accident, right? 5 milliseconds, you're down to about 2.5 inches. So you need that latency reduction. So we'll have more equipment in more places out at the edge of the network in those baseband pools. Some of it will be in a building. You could imagine a building like this with cells throughout the building. In the bottom would be the basebands, down in a secure area, with application servers sitting on it for whatever applications Courtyard wanted to offer. And those networks are being built today. Houston, Minneapolis, Miami, Atlanta, Dallas, Charlotte. I can name. So yeah, it's virtualization is a tough one for wireless networks. It matters what hardware we have, okay? And the best example I can give you is if you do a Google search, right? And it comes back and says 0.71 seconds, right? And you do another Google search and the servers are backed up for some reason, right? And it comes back at 0.91 seconds. Does anybody care? Right? No. Doesn't matter. Inconsequential. Two cars going towards each other, 70 miles an hour. One processes in 0.7 seconds, the other one processes 0.9 seconds. Does it matter? Yeah, it matters a lot. So that hardware, if it's, obviously within hardware and computing, you stack things up and ready for processing. Unless it knows what to prioritize and when and how, right, it falls apart very quickly. So it could be there sitting processing my kid's NBA game, going, oh yeah, we're going to get through this video here. Don't worry about those two cars going towards each other, right? So prioritization of hardware is very, very important in wireless. And that's why, if you remember a few years ago, they tried taking a packet core and putting it on commercial hardware, and it never worked because the hardware just didn't know what to prioritize which way, and it all fell apart, right? Some people wake in for a phone call while the other guy's downloading his email, right? So it's virtualization, yeah, we'll get there, but it'll be on our own hardware. You're not just we're not going out to Best Buy and buying a Dell server and plugging it in at home and running autonomous vehicle applications on it, I hope. Short answer, no. Short question, long answer. There you go.
Thank you.
So to expand on that question, so the spending that's going on right now that you're saying.
Run, Larry, run.
The spending that's going on right now that you're saying in certain markets, is that included in that 110 billion number that you mentioned before?
No. Oh, yes, sorry, the 110, yes. So this forecast I showed here is just from 21. What we actually did was, in our new version of this, I actually did it from 16 to 26 as one model. So you can see LTE spend, and then 5G spend, like that, right? But it's icky because, like densification, right? We need to put in more small cells, okay? So if I put a small cell in today for LTE, that's an LTE spend. But then I upgrade that radio in a few years to 5G. Well, what do I class as the 5G spend? The upgrade? Well, it's pretty cheap. I got away pretty easily there, right? But yet I could put in a new small cell in a few years that starts for 5G, and $65,000 is going to go into the 5G bucket, right? So it's, as I'm saying, this is not a light switch here, right? You've really got to look at it as this evolution and total spend.
And then one other question. So going back to that kind of progression in LTE, so from a handset standpoint, does that mean each version or revision requires a new handset, or will these handsets then be able to, just through a software upgrade, be able to handle each new version?
Yes and no. No and yes. Depends on the frequency. So if 3.5 gigahertz indoor, for example, comes out in a few years. Actually, let's take 600 meg. Your phone today does not handle 600 megahertz, right? So whoever wins the 600 meg auctions, when they launch those networks, that will not use it because you don't have a radio or an antenna in there. You go buy a new one. Now, the good news is Apple already knows, Apple, Qualcomm, etc., Samsung, they already know what's coming, so they can get ahead of the curve, right? And this is why we're actually in pretty good shape right now, because Apple does tend to sell 1 or 2 models around the world. the carriers actually turn frequencies on and off software-wise in the phone. Your phone is physically capable of more than it actually will deliver. But don't worry about that. You get a new phone every 2 years anyway. So, unless you're 17. Do you know that women, I shouldn't say this. Did you know that women break their phones about twice as often as men do? I have statistical survey proof on this. It's true. True. Do you know why? Projectile? They've got stupid husbands? No, they blame it on their purses, their bags. That as they're hunting around my wife's bag, like, you know, there's like an entire car's worth of stuff in there, and you know, you pull stuff out, you get the phone, or you pull something else out, the phone goes flying, right? It's true. You're all nodding. You're thinking about that. Not their fault. Yeah.
The women I know drop them in toilets.
Let's not go there. Are we taking a break now?
We got time for one more question, and then it's
Okay.
I have a public service announcement, and then we're taking a break.
Any other questions? If you have any other questions, you think about this late at night, you're thinking, wow, I should have asked Iain that. Oh, there's one here.
Sure, I'll grab the mic.
You can call me if you've got any other.
Does it really matter for anything over, say, 6 gig, given how poor the propagation characteristics are for those ultra-high frequency bands?
Yeah, it depends, right? It depends on the application. If you're driving at 70 miles an hour down a road, you really don't want 28 gig. And T-Mobile, I know some T-Mobile folks here, you guys have said that you see 28 gig really as a mobile band, right? I don't think you really mean that. You don't mean me getting in my car and driving 60 miles an hour down the road and using 28 gig and handing off the call every 200 feet, right? What you mean is, I'm going to move from here to here to here. I'm going to sit in the park and watch Netflix. And I'm going to go to my office and watch Netflix, and etc. So it's nomadic type applications, and that's fine. Yeah, above 6 gig, you do get propagation becomes an issue. The reason and I'll finish with this, millimeter wave, the stuff they're talking about, Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile trialing, is at 28 and 39 gig. Those of you may remember this. This is the old LMDS band, right? And we tried this years ago. I've got reports, 2006 on LMDS. And they were going to have wireless delivery of TV channels. Remember those? To the home and things, right? Didn't work, right? Costs were out of whack, and it was just too expensive. Why now? Why will 28 gig work now to deliver Netflix, et cetera, to our home and all the things I've talked about? And the answer is MIMO antennas and really smart radios. So instead of having that antenna just broadcasting a signal, that antenna can point it straight at Christian and point straight at Andrew's house with massive accuracy and very efficiently. And so the technology is kind of caught up to the radio. One of the things they do with millimeter wave, and the planning software does this, it works out reflections off buildings. So you may have an antenna here and a building in the way here, and your home is where Todd is, but we're actually going to bounce the signal off that building there and into his home. It's cool. And just hope the building doesn't move or something. So. All right, thanks.